and move right on to current business. And before we even get into that, we want to say farewell to Planner Nichols as he moves on to his next venture. Didn't even get to know you.
Well, yes, I'm very fortunate in terms of being able to take a new opportunity with the city of Anaheim. And as I was saying earlier, it's a very hard community to leave with the work that we've been able to do together. And but in our field, it's always a matter of trying to leave a community better than when you found it. And with the team that we have in the planning division and the work I know they're going to be able to do, I feel very strongly about the fact that this community is very much better served than when I had arrived. So, and part of that is actually one of the staff members who was here before you today, and Ivan Flores. So thank you very much, Commissioner Span.
Thank you. So we'll move right on to current business, H1, Mills Act and Historic Preservation presentation.
So as it says in the agenda before you, this is Ivan Flores, our associate planner, and he's going to be providing just a brief overview of the Mills Act process here in general and as it really applies across the state, and as well as the approach to historic preservation and some background history here in Escondido. As the commission knows, we haven't had any projects that have necessitated review by the HPC now in several months, but because we were canceling the last few meetings, we wanted to make sure we took an opportunity to get with our new commissioners on board to have some at least baseline information, and that's what Associate Planner Flores will be providing. So with that, Ivan, take it away.
Thank you, Chairman, and good afternoon, Commissioners. As stated by my colleague, my name is Ivan Flores, and I'm an Associate Planner with the Planning Division of the City of Escondido. I'll be providing a brief overview on historic preservation in our city and briefly discuss the Secretary of Interior standards for treatment on historic properties and some background information on the Mills Act and how we process those within the city. So I'm sure as many of you know, the city of Escondido was incorporated as a city in 1888, and as many Southern California cities experienced a large land boom during this time. It was additionally during this time, the city saw the greatest variety of residential architecture built in the city from 1887 to 1913. The 1980s and through the 1980s and 1990s, the city saw a real effort to retain and catalog many of the historical sites around the city. These efforts resulted in the first historical site survey conducted in 1984. In 1989, the Old Escondido Neighborhood District was adopted, which featured around 900 homes. And as you can see on the map here, is bounded by 4th Avenue to the north, 13th to the south, Escondido Boulevard to the west, and the Chestnut to the east. In the 2000s, the survey was updated and along with our historic preservation ordinance, which was revised, and it's known as Article 40 in the Escondido Zoning Code. The Mills Act was enacted in 1972 to assist with the restoration, rehabilitation, and maintenance of the Hotel de Coronado. In 1990, the City Council adopted an ordinance establishing the Historic Preservation Program and adoption of the Mills Act Incentive Program. Around 80 communities in California have adopted this program to fit the needs of their community. We approximately have 238 homes on the city's local register, and approximately 100 of them have an active Mills Act agreement. The Mills Act is essentially an economic incentive to encourage property owners to preserve, rehabilitate, and maintain their historic properties. The minimum term of a contract is 10 years with an automatic renewal after a year. Any changes in tax assessments are handled by the county assessor, who can provide property owners who are interested with an estimate of their saving under a Mills Act contract. Ultimately, the Mills Act recognizes the importance of historic preservation and economic revitalization of older areas and retaining the sense of community. As a part of this, the property owner agrees to periodic inspections as a part of the Mills Act agreement. So here we have a brief description on what it takes to apply for a Mills Act agreement with the city of Escondido. Out of these requirements, the most important requirement is that the home is listed on a local, national, or state register, whether it's one of our local registers, the state of California register, or the National Register for Historic Properties. If they are listed, they're eligible to apply for a Mills Act, and there is no fee to apply for a Mills Act agreement with the city. They would provide all this information when they're applying for a Mills Act, and we would review it internally and bring it back to the Historic Commission for review and with a recommendation to City Council. So generally, we encourage anyone who's interested to apply for a Mills Act to reach out to a planner to set up a pre-application meeting to, first of all, see if their property is designated on the city's local register or one of the previously mentioned registers. As a part of that, we would then conduct a site visit and review the proposed improvements that they are proposing that they would do under the Mills Act agreement. Once we have finalized what those improvements are going to look like, it's really a discussion with the applicant as to what is eligible for Mills Act, what could be covered under those improvements, and we'll talk a little bit about those later. Once we get to a point where we can draft the recommendation to the Historic Preservation Commission, we would schedule that for a hearing. And then the Historic Preservation Commission would then recommend to the City Council approval or denial as presented or with modifications. At the City Council hearing, the City Council will then approve with modifications or deny the agreement. The applicant is then responsible for getting the agreement signed and recorded. As a stipulation of being under the contract, and with most historic properties, they are responsible for conforming to the requirements of the United States Secretary of Interior Standards for Rehabilitation. These standards are put out by the National Park Service, and they usually put out a technical bulletin assistance to assist property owners with conforming with these standards outlined in their technical assistance guidelines. There are 4 approaches as outlined in the SOI's guidelines, and those are preservation, rehabilitation, restoration, and reconstruction. Preservation is the practice of utilizing measures to sustain the existing form, integrity, and materials of a historic property. Rehabilitation is the practice of making possible a compatible use for a property through repair, alterations, and additions while preserving the features which convey its historical significance. Restoration is the practice of accurately depicting the forms, features, and character of a property as it appeared at a particular period of time by the means of removal of features from inappropriate time periods. And reconstruction is the practice of depicting by means of new construction the details of a non-surviving site for the purpose of replicating its appearance at a specific period of time. It's easy to see these standards as an order of preference. So if it's possible, you're always going to want to preserve the features if they're not in a deteriorated state. If you can't preserve them, you can then move to rehabilitation. And if there are past rehabilitation, then you move to restoration and reconstruction and so on. And we'll discuss a little bit about what that means in the next couple slides. So preservation is really about retaining the building as it currently exists, and that can sometimes include later changes and additions to the original building. It's important to recognize that even additions can become historical in their own sense. And so really what it means to preserve it as it is. Under this treatment style, it's highly discouraged to make any attempts to reconstruct or replace. If you're able to repair it, then conform with the SOI's guidelines as it pertains to preservation. It's incredibly important that you retain existing material and propose very little new material. The SOI guidelines do indicate that when it comes to mechanical, electrical, sometimes that can be acceptable as long as it's very minimal under this type of treatment. In these photos, you could see specifically with the top left corner of the bricks. In this case, a effort was made to repair the mortar on this brick, and they unfortunately used the wrong cement and ended up causing some of the bricks to pop out. On the photo on the right, what you will see is a man who is hand removing the paint. So it's always encouraged to use the less abrasive method when it comes to removal of paint and other surfacing. If needed, as shown on the bottom image, if needed, it is appropriate to replace with in-kind material, and that is what they are doing here with this comp shingle on the side of this house on the bottom picture. The next method of treatment that is encouraged by the SOI standards is rehabilitation. So out of all the 4 treatments that are outlined in the technical assistance guidelines and the SOI's guidelines, is that rehabilitation allows for an efficient contemporary use through repair or alteration. Out of all 4 treatments, it is the only treatment that allows for the use of additions and using compatible substitute materials if in-kind material is not available. People are given greater latitude when it comes to doing rehabilitations. So generally, when you think of a rehabilitation, it can be used to address a new use that's being established in the structure. For example, let's say that there's a new restaurant going into an existing residence, which is pretty common. It's adaptive reuse. And under rehabilitation, it does allow for minor additions, as long as it's subordinate to the historic building. And really, the goal with rehabilitation and doing additions to existing historic structures is that those additions can be removed without causing any damage to the historic property or the historic structure itself. So as you would see in the example of the re-roof, in this example they are replacing the roofing material, but they are replacing it with in-kind material, which happens to be composition shingle. The picture on the bottom left and the bottom right, it is the same exact window. Here they were able to retain the amount of window panes and essentially able to rehabilitate the wood without having to replace it. As mentioned earlier, it's always encouraged to use a less abrasive method when you are doing any type of rehabilitation work or preservation or restoration for that matter. The 6 brick, on the brick example, what they used on the left side was a high pressure washer to clean the brick. And as you can see, it caused damage as opposed to what was done on the right side. So with restoration, the goal of restoration is to make the building appear as it did at a particular and its most significant time in its history. This restoration period can be established through historical research and documentation. The priority when you are doing a restoration treatment under the SOI's guidelines is to first identify the materials and features from that restoration period. As you can see in this example on the top left, that is the home of the former President James Madison, which was added to over time. And sometime in the 80s, I want to say, the property was purchased by the National Historic Preservation Trust and was restored to its original design, which can be seen on the right. And so as you can see, the massing was inappropriate, and they made alterations to the building to make it look as it was appearing at that time. Another example here is the removal of a porch and some railing on this residence on the bottom left. And the original porch was restored, and they were able to put the original railing, and it looks like they were able to keep the columns also. And so really, when you're doing restoration work, if you're going to do this type of work, you want to make sure you're able to identify what exactly period you're restoring it to, what period you're restoring it to. So as with any type of treatment under the SOI's guidelines, they highly encourage the use of physical documentation to assist in any type of repair work or work that's done under these guidelines. Right here at the top left, what you see is a postcard image of a restaurant from the 1940s. And so as you can see, it has a marquee sign, some signage on top of the awning, and there's a rounding to the awning that you're not going to see in the next image. So as you can tell, in this work that was done for this, what looks to be a restaurant, the marquee sign was removed. The awning, the character defining features of the awning were changed to be more rectangular in shape. Although they did keep some of the fenestration and some of those other character defining features of this type of commercial building. And so here is an attempt by the new tenant Walgreens to restore this building to what it originally looked like. And so any work that's done under restoration should really have that physical documentation to really justify restoration work that's done. And so here they ended up rounding off the awnings again, and they put the marquee sign and they put the Walgreens sign on top of the awning itself, or canopy. Also, as you can see, they ended up using spandrel glass to replace the pigmented structural glass, which is that glass that is the squares around at the top, the squares that kind of frame the building. And they were able to restore it to its original 1945 design. The last method that you are seeing here is reconstruction. So reconstruction is when you are trying to essentially reconstruct a historical structure that may have been destroyed. As a part of, in this case, the lighthouse to the left was actually destroyed by Hurricane Katrina and was fully reconstructed to its original design. So when you're doing a reconstruction, it's never appropriate to base the reconstruction upon conjectural designs or features from other buildings. If you can't find photo documentation to reconstruct a historical site, the SOI guidelines do recommend using some sort of some other explanatory marker to explain what was there. If it never existed, don't reconstruct it, even if you find plans or pictures or any type of evidence that might indicate it was constructed. There's a very large emphasis on being able to find that documentation to justify whether or not a structure should be reconstructed. It's not always appropriate to reconstruct something that is based off of what you could call flimsy evidence that it ever existed. So oftentimes reconstruction and restoration can be done in tandem. You can think of them as complementing each other. And so reconstruction is that last type of treatment that if there's nothing there to preserve, if there's nothing there to rehabilitate, if there's nothing there to restore, and you have documentary evidence showing that this structure or this type of use did exist at one time, then you should reconstruct it. It's always encouraged to use substitute material, or if there's any existing material, to reuse that material in the construction of the reconstruction itself. So at this picture at the bottom right was the former palace of a governor in New York, as it was called, burned down in 1798, and was reconstructed using the same exact plans from that time. And I want to say the 50s is when it was reconstructed. So here they have that sufficient documentary evidence to show that this did exist, this is what it looked like, and they ended up undergoing this reconstruction effort. So now I'm going to kind of bounce back to the Mills Act and kind of what we typically see when people are wanting to make improvements to their historical resource. Typically those improvements are windows, doors, fixtures, roofs, and fences. They are able to do structural reinforcements if it's required. A lot of this, what the improvement plan is based off of, is what's called the historical resources report. And so they would provide us with this report identifying features that need to be repaired over the course of these 10 years. And I'm sorry if I didn't mention this, but for those that are new and don't have a Mills Act, the Mills Act is essentially a tax benefit that the person, it's a property tax reduction that they're able to then. The idea is that they get these reductions and they're able to use that money to restore the home itself. And as a part of that, they're required to submit to us an improvement plan to make sure that they're conforming to that improvement plan over the course of the Mills Act lifetime, the Mills Act agreement lifetime. And so sometimes we'll get requests for people who want to repaint their homes, and that requires a review by the city for properties that are in the register or in the old Escondido neighborhood district. And that will conclude staff's presentation. If anybody has any questions, I'd be more than happy to answer them.
Do you want to maybe for the people that are new, explain to them what it takes to be on the Mills Act?
Yeah, of course. So to be on the Mills Act, you will need to essentially, if your house is not designated, right, to qualify for a Mills Act, you need to be on a local register, or state or national. If you are interested in getting your home designated, you can actually do that concurrently. So you would apply for the designation and also apply for the Mills Act agreement. And so really the first step is getting that designation if your property is not designated. And then working with staff to identify improvements to your property that need to be made. Is that sufficient?
Yeah, there are like 7 qualifications that you need.
Oh.
You need several of them to be able to.
Yes, to be designated in the first place, you need to meet criteria. The criteria is essentially the same usually across the board, but some of those criteria, if I can recall correctly, is your structure identified with somebody of local significance? Does your residence or your business or your building or your site, is it of significant architectural character in some sense? Another one is it made of, does it possess a distinctive craftsmanship? And so there is criteria that you need to satisfy to get listed. And those are within our historic preservation ordinance, which is Article 40.
And you don't have to meet all 7. It's important to note, I believe it's only 2. You have to meet 2 of the requirements, and one of them, those that Associate Planner Flores stated is correct. And then the fundamental other one is that they're over 50 years old. So I would say with a goal of trying to promote historic preservation in the community, the way in which the other item in terms of making the 2 findings for historic preservations are very not ambiguous, but large purposefully, because it gives a lot of opportunity to make the necessary findings to hopefully preserve, especially in the old historic Escondido neighborhood. The only other thing I wanted to kind of add that Commissioner Correll was somewhat touching on, I believe, as well, is, and Associate Planner Flores touched on as well, is that there is always, with every property that is a historic property or located within our historic district, there is what's called character defining features. Okay, you're going to hear that word a lot here on the commission. And character defining features are identified by professionals as to what makes something historic and special and worth saving. And so I would tell you, just in terms of the 4 different approaches to historic preservation, the priority of those, and in order, as they said, we'd rather see preservation, obviously, more than construction, so on and so forth, is to preserve and strengthen those character-defining features. Ultimately, hopefully, if they've been altered to such an extent, to restore them, and or if they exist, how can we preserve and rehabilitate? So it's important to note that, because just because a structure is historic for these character defining features ultimately doesn't always mean everything about a structure is historic. So if it's a type of construction that was something that we see commonly, is something kind of at the turn of the century, housing development associated with the farm workers, the simple cottages that we see a lot of, in terms of usually they're located on large lots, and we have people want to come forward and redevelop those. You obviously want to keep the prominence, as it was stated in the presentation, of that historic structure, that historic amenity of our community, but there's always opportunities, and designed correctly, and how you can still promote and highlight those historic components while allowing more modern development. I know families today typically don't like to live in 2-bedroom, 1-bath, 750 square foot units, which are oftentimes what some of those units are in the example I gave. So it is a balance, and it is a balance that, you as the HPC will have to weigh with many of the projects that will ultimately come to you. And so I just wanted to highlight those also components and touch on that, because I really think those character defining features are so critical and important, especially not only when you're evaluating Mills Act and those types of situations, but when you're dealing with projects that are looking to preserve, in essence, a historic structure in some form or fashion, but add on to it. How can we make sure we maintain its prominence, as Planner Flores said, and try to strengthen, again, those character-defining features, but allowing for redevelopment and investment into our community. So I think those are all very important items to remember as you move forward in these roles. So, as Associate Planner Flores said, is there any other comments, questions, or thoughts for the betterment of all the commission or to staff?
I just want to add what you talked about. People don't want to live in these houses. If you haven't been on the Mother's Day tour in the Historic District, I strongly encourage you to, because you'll see how people function, families function in these houses, and they adapt to it. And all of a sudden you realize you don't need a huge house, you need an efficient house, and that's what most of these historic houses are, efficient. It's my goal for people to be able to enjoy their house and live in it and still maintain the outside integrity of the historic structure. There's certain things we're not going to regulate, such as solar, electric, because we can't. Electrical upgrades are a necessity in all of them. Plumbing upgrades are a necessity, so we don't even touch on those, but they still need permits. The other thing I want to say is, as far as appropriate color, you can find a historic color at the counter for pretty much whatever you want. So it's not like, oh, the city's not going to let me paint my house the color I want. Well, if it's magenta or purple, probably not. But if you go there and with the color you have in mind, you can go through those historic color palettes and find something that's so close, you'll be very happy with it. And the last thing I want to say is when you do get your certificate of appropriateness, it does not expire. So, I mean, right now I'm going to tape one up on a window and paint the house the same color as it was approved for before, because you don't have to reapply for a certificate. Last question, how much, for the record, are the, is there a charge to get on the register? And then how much is the charge now for the Mills Act?
So, if I recall correctly, we do not charge for the certificate of appropriateness, and
No.
I do not believe we were charging a cost for the local designation or the Mills Act.
Oh, really? I was under the impression we had started.
We can definitely verify and get back to you, Commissioner, and we can send an email out to everyone just to confirm that. But really what I wanted to jump in here is actually thank Commissioner Chair Span for his comments, because we do promote and try to get people in as part of that pre-application question of, hey, I have something on my property, what can I do, and try to get them in that pre-app process. But we do have a really thick binder of all types of color combinations for these simple things. And you know what, it's amazing how much we use that, especially in the old Escondido neighborhood, because while we do have many historic homes in the old Escondido neighborhood, not all of them are, right? And so we want to be able to provide flexibility for those that are non-historic but in the district, and maintain some general contribution to the look and the feel and the development pattern of the old Escondido neighborhood, and still provide them options for them to, again, make those improvements, make those exterior facial improvements, because we do want to see investment, and we don't want to see, obviously, homes to be deteriorated. So thank you for bringing that up, Chair Span.
Excuse me, Chair, if I may, you are correct. There is actually a fee now. It seems $500 for the Mills Act and $500 for the local designation. The certificate of appropriateness is still free, and then we charge for a design review.
So if you want to apply for both of them concurrently, it's $1,000.
That is correct.
Okay, thank you. Does anybody else have a question?
Yes, I have a question. So as a new member, I'm trying to understand the goals of the committee with promoting historical preservation. One is through the Mills Act, I'm hearing, but it's something that, Sean, you just mentioned now. We have a historical district. For homes that don't have Mills Act, what are our goals related to homes that are not necessarily historically designated, have a Mills Act? I just want to have a better understanding of those dynamics related to the committee's goals.
Thank you, Commissioner. So I think it's important to note that the role of HPC isn't necessarily to promote and go out. In essence, that's not the role of HPC, but it's to, when projects come forward, to be able to evaluate and to be able to provide guidance consistent with Article 40 and all of the technical studies that you'll see come before HPC. Now, that's not to say individually, because I know individually our commissioners do often talk with members of the public, recommend they come talk with staff, and that's just being good stewards of your community. And I always applaud our commissioners when they in those efforts. But I will tell you, in terms of the issue of the Mills Act is not the quote-unquote end-all of historic preservation. You can be on the historic properties list and not have a Mills Act. You can also be on the survey and not be considered a historical resource because you haven't taken that next step to be quote-unquote designated on the list. But in terms of a few things, one, if you're on the list, there are components, again, that identify those character-defining features that we want to make sure that with any project for any home that may or may not be designated or is on the list or within the district as appropriate, that we're preserving those components. I would tell you that if it's a home, for example, that's not historic in the Escondido district, but is in the district, it still oftentimes will come to HPC for recommendations and design components. And I think that HPC has really done a good job in terms of balancing, because as I said, just development patterns in general follow certain patterns in that area, whether it's historic or not. And, you know, it might be for a variety of reasons. One was chosen or selected as being historic or opportunity to be historic, and another one wasn't. But we do have design guidelines that give us direction regarding what can and can't be done. But again, context and character with the surrounding area is, I would say, of the utmost importance, especially when you're looking at non-historic properties within the district. Does that kind of give you some sense of answering your question, or I can...
Yeah, I mean, I'm just trying to understand the relationships between being in a historically district area up against, right, like and if you, so I'm still trying to get a little bit more clarity between just if you're not a historically designated home versus living in a historically or a historical district, and just trying to understand that a little bit more.
So I will say, as well, a large portion of our historic structures are located in the old Escondido neighborhood. There are identified either on the survey or even on the register a number of historic resources throughout the community. There's historic resources on Grand Avenue. Grand Avenue isn't necessarily its own designated historic district, but many of those structures are on the list, and so there's protections in place and requirements they have to go through to preserve and make sure we don't impact those character-defining features. So it doesn't really matter if you're in or out of if you're in or not in a historic district. If you're identified on the survey or are already designated a historic structure, it just has to do with, I would honestly say, more to the structures that are not considered historic and what is the processes and the review they would need to go to.
Thank you.
Just to add to that, the houses you're probably referring to that aren't historic are considered contributors. In other words, they contribute to the atmosphere, to the historic relevance of the neighborhood. So we have to be careful that we can't impose certain restrictions on them that we can on historic houses, but we can be very careful that they're not going to stand out like a sore thumb. They have to contribute to the neighborhood because they are a contributing factor. And there are historic houses all over town. The other thing I wanted to bring up is when you think historic house, you think of the beach house and these big old Craftsmans. But right now, the mid-century houses are just as historic, and there's probably fewer of them. So the goal of the commission is to have as many houses on the Mills Act as possible, because that is what's going to preserve historically Escondido. The other thing I want to touch on really quick, if anybody says, well, gee, if you're on the Mills Act, you get a reduction in taxes. Statistics in the past have shown that neighborhoods with houses on the Mills Act will raise the property value of the adjoining houses, so that the state does make up for what the little bit they're giving you off to preserve your house. They're making up because everybody else's property value goes up, and it encourages everybody else to maintain their property. So, just a couple of thoughts.
Yeah, the rising tide lifts all
Raises
ships.
all boats.
Absolutely, and that's very, very common statistic throughout the country. In fact, so.
We're going to oversee any of the historic homes that are within our zip code, basically. So like I live in a Mills Act home in South Escondido, close to the mall. So I'm not anywhere in the district, but I'm still a Mills Act home in our area. So anything in 92025 will come this way for that kind of review.
Were we by any chance selected based off of zip code, or because I'm 9202 now? Okay, just making sure.
You applied.
I was in 92027 when I got on it.
That's right.
But I was in the county, but I was technically like in a sliver, and I was okay.
Okay. Do we have any more questions of staff? Thank you so much. Okay, we're going to move on to current business 2, the Brown Act presentation.
Yes, so commissioners, we do have a number of new commissioners, and we do this regularly with Planning Commission yearly. I'm sure that the City Council probably gets it even more so than that. And we're very fortunate to have Zach Beck as our city clerk, and who is in just a plethora and a huge resource in terms of knowledge and experience with these types of issues. So just to make sure everyone understands, because you are commissioners and you do have limitations in some ways regarding some of your correspondences, if you will. And so our city clerk, Zach Beck, will take you through those now.
Thanks, Sean. Too kind. No. So,
No.
Happy to be here. And first, I just want to thank all the commissioners, those who got reappointed, those who are here for the first time. It's really great to have you all here. We're going to have a time at the end of the meeting for commissioner comments. I'd love for each new commissioner and all the present commissioners to just share a little bit about your background, kind of what got you interested in joining this. Real quickly, in addition, before I go into the Brown Act overview, one of the things that the council has really encouraged, and you probably experienced this during your interview process, is they want all commissions to try to do their best to be more active and engaged in the community. And I think one of the points I heard from both Mayor McNamara and Councilmember Martinez, who serve on the Board and Commission Subcommittee, they wanted to see if it's possible for the Historic Preservation Commission to maybe do some more outreach. I think even Councilmember Morosco mentioned something to that effect. The reason why I bring it up is I know we haven't met recently as a body for quite some time. Usually it's more in response to Mills Act applications, but if there's other things that the commission wants to pursue or other activities you want to do, you control that. So if you want to bring another item for an agenda, if you want us to hold a special meeting, we can do that. You as the commissioners let us know and we can move forward. So I just want to kind of give you that overview and let you know you have a lot of latitude in that regard. And in addition to that, next year, the council is going to request that each commission comes forward and brings forward a report that basically outlines some of their activities that you've been doing. You might have heard them talk a little bit about that during our mixer we had a few months ago with all the council members. So anyways, before I jump into it, I just wanted to give you guys that background. Now we'll go into the Brown Act. So this is a law that governs all legislative bodies in the state of California. So I just want to give you a very simple background, what we deal with serial meetings and how we want to avoid that, and then just some simple best practice. This is going to be very, very high level. So we'll just go with the basic background. The Brown Act was enacted after Watergate, and what happens is basically it's the sunshine law for government. So it's meaning that every public meeting we have, whether it's a council meeting, a planning commission meeting, a historic preservation commission meeting, is publicly accessible. So members of the public can come, they can speak, and that they're properly notified about it. So we have 72-hour notification requirement that we have to have the agenda posted, has to be placed online, and then everyone is able to come and attend. The Brown Act has been modified slightly since the pandemic because we had a period of time where we were having teleconference, video conference, Zoom meetings, things along those lines. So now we have to allow public participation in additional measures. You might see at council meetings now, I'll be reading publicly submitted comments that individuals email. They can do the same thing for Historic Preservation Commission meeting. They don't have to be here in person. They can just submit it online and we'll read it into the record. So that's kind of big picture of what goes on with the Brown Act. But now when it comes to you as a commissioner, so specifically for yourself, how you want to avoid violating the Brown Act is first, do not meet with more than 3 commissioners separate from a public meeting. You just don't want to be meeting with more than a quorum of the commission. And the reason for that is that basically you don't want to be perceived as holding a HPC meeting which is not technically noticed and properly vetted by the public, so that we are not working behind the scenes, in the smoke-filled room, making a decision, then coming forward and making that decision in front of the public. So that's number one. Number two, just good practice for all is just to try and not discuss your position on an item. You can do so with an individual commissioner, but really once you get to that third person, when you get to above the quorum, then you could be in violation potentially of the Brown Act. And that could also have some legal ramifications, which has happened here in the county of San Diego in the state of California, where someone, like let's say if you deny a Mills Act application or something to that effect, but it's discovered that 4 of you talked about it beforehand, that could get legally challenged and the city could be liable financially for that. There are some exceptions to having more than 3 members meet, would be for conferences, community meetings, social events. Like I said, that mixer we had, that was not a violation of the Brown Act because there was no business taking place. It was just kind of an event. So that's really big picture. Now, email, this is probably going to be even more practical for all of us because you guys are going to receive emails related to the HPC. One, just use caution when emailing other commissioners. Once again, try to avoid getting to a point where you're emailing more than a quorum. And then by doing that, you can try to not reply all. I would just recommend if you have any specific questions, you can email myself. I'm happy to answer anything for you. You can email the future staff liaison for the HPC and they'll be able to assist you. And that is kind of most importantly for the Brown Act as relates to you as commissioners. There's other regulations that relate to myself and the city attorney and all of that, but for you guys, that's pretty much it. So any questions about that at all? Pretty simple. All right, cool. So that's all I have for the Brown Act, and yeah, appreciate you guys. Jim, anyone else?
Wow, that wrapped up quick.
Yeah, very quick.
Does anybody have any questions about the Brown Act? One thing I did want to add as far as we are not supposed to form an opinion until it's been presented to us by either the staff or the applicant. I mean, it's pretty hard not to have an opinion, but don't let it out your lips. You know, I've sat here at many meetings knowing how I'm going to vote, but you better put on that face that I am impartial and I'm listening to everything. And you never know, you might hear something that's going to change your opinion, but do not come off as if you come into the meeting with a decision you've already made, because the idea is we're here to listen to the applicant and they will go on, and they usually get 3 minutes or 2 minutes, or if there's not a whole lot of speakers, we'll let them talk longer than that. But you technically have not made a decision until the presentation is done, and that is where the legal ramifications come in, because if somebody sees you roll your eyes during a presentation, some lawyer is going to get a hold of that and take it apart. So,
And you'll generally get your agenda ahead of time, so take the time to drive and go look at the house, go look at the neighborhood, go around and do a little bit of research on your own, and it'll help you tremendously. The pictures are nice, but they're not the same thing as driving by.
yes. Thank you, Zach.
Yeah, for sure.
Okay, that concludes our current business. Oral communication, does anybody in the audience want to speak about anything? Would you come up
Yeah,
to
you
the
can come to
podium,
the
please?
podium. Yeah, you have 3 minutes if you come to the podium. Yeah. Yeah, just the center one right there.
And state your name for the record, please. Right up
Oh,
there.
the center. Yeah, sorry.
We have allowed podiums.
Good afternoon, everyone. Thank you very much for your time. I'm doing a due diligence on a property on Grand and Broadway. Even though I was told by the planning department that I could come here and get an idea, I know that I have to fill out an application and apply for it. The building, I just wanted to raise the awning on a building. It's right on the corner of.
Right, on the old mercantile.
Right, exactly. Do you think that's going to cause any problems in the future or not?
You know,
Commissioners, before, I would just like to add that this is not an item on this agenda. It is not something that the commission can provide any kind of feedback to legally to the applicant. You can take oral communication and, reinforce that they can apply for go through the process and pre-application, which might include HPC review, but we cannot legally provide any kind of guidance to the applicant.
I wasn't about to give any kind of legal advice. However, I'm going to give you some advice. Go to the counter and talk to them, because that is purely a building issue. From there, if they determine that it should come back to us, we'll hear it.
They sent me here, actually.
Well, then they need to put it on the agenda, because we can't even talk about it. But I think that you're probably getting the wrong information. I know that there's been countless awning issues on Grand Avenue, and it goes to the counter. And if there's some reason why it's historically important, it will come to us. But that definitely is a staff issue, and we can't deal with any kind of codes or anything like that.
But based on your past experience, it has been a.
I couldn't even tell you how it goes.
And I've just asked Associate Planner Flores will be talking with the gentleman here. We'll get his contact information and make sure we steer him in the right direction.
Okay, so you will get personal attention.
Thank you. I
Thank
appreciate
you.
it. Thanks for your time.
Okay, I think that's everybody in the audience. Now it's the time for commissioner comments.
I'm Commissioner Hanlon. I do have a comment to make. Sean, first of all, thank you very much for your service to Escondido. And another thing I wanted to say is that I've been dealing with the building department at City Hall here quite extensively, and I wanted to give my sincerest thanks to how easy the city makes it, how well-informed Doug Moody, John DeVay are, and it's been an exceptional and most pleasant experience, because I know you guys hear it all from right and left as in difficult to get a hold of, or this falls through the cracks. Well, I've had a very good experience. Thank you.
Thank you, and I will definitely pass along those comments. I will tell you, I've worked with several communities in my 20-plus year career, and this community is extremely lucky to be served by such an amazing building official and team behind him. Doug Moody is hands down one of, if not the top building official I've ever worked with. So really the community is very lucky. So thank you.
I just have a quick question, maybe more about training. Is there a manual of some sort that we'll get? I went to the Pioneer Room and looked at the original one, but I'm assuming it's changed.
Yeah, so I know there was just the general commissioner handbook that I sent,
Yeah.
but as it relates to the Historic Preservation Commission specifically, Sean, do you guys have anything on?
We were in the process, and we've been trying to update that. I will tell you, unfortunately, just until recently, staffing has been even more, we'll say, stretched thin until very recently. And so we are working to get that up to date. I will tell you that there are some upcoming trainings that the city is signing up for that are recorded. And so similar to what we've done here, we'll definitely either, whether it's in here, if we'll notice the meeting for another room so we can more easily show, but we do have some plans for some additional video training regarding, again, just historic preservation in general, Secretary of Interior standards, those types of things coming down the line.
On that note, Sean, would it be possible for maybe Ivan to email his PowerPoint to the entire commission?
Oh, absolutely.
Today? I think that might be helpful, just so you guys have it as a resource.
Yeah, we'll PDF it and send it out to make it easy.
Okay, and I'm not sure that I have a handbook. You said you sent something.
Might have been back in April, May timeframe, right after everyone was appointed. There was just a very simple commissioner handbook. If you didn't, I can email it to you right now. Yeah, for sure.
I think originally I remember getting a binder that had everybody's email in it, and I think it had the original booklet that I think you're talking about back to Jerry Harmon's time when the commission was started, and that is a real good book. We don't have to try to improve it. If we can just, if there are no more of them around, they ought to just reprint some copies of that, because it's kind of nice to go back and look at.
Yeah, not a problem.
I do have a couple comments here. Did you have another?
I think that's it.
Well, the binder that you should get would have everything that you're talking about in it. Because I remember we've always got a binder, even if we had one before, they used to pass them out. I would like to address the fact that we've had so many canceled meetings. We need to have meetings, even if it's just very minimal on the agenda, because we are so out of touch with what's going on. I feel like it's been since we were appointed, and what was that, back in March?
And we missed the awards this year completely.
That's right. We did. We didn't give any awards, did we? Historic preservation awards. Yeah. So I'd like to find something to talk about, even if it's. I know that Paul used to put together a little. He would record, because you have to pay money to get those seminars that are good for continuing education, and then we get in the boardroom and watch it an hour and a half, I think it was, and they're very informative. And they do get us credits that we can record, because we all have to have these credits. So we need to look into that. I keep getting things on email from different groups that talk about it, and how much it is. And I know that I don't think the city used to pay for them. If they did, they paid a one-time minimal fee, and then they could record it and show it at a later time. The handbook that was covered. Are we going to? I know that we're operating without a vice chair now. That doesn't have to be noticed to make a nomination. I'd like to nominate Commissioner Carell to be the vice chair. If I have a second for that, we can vote.
Yeah, and I can just explain that to the rest of the new commissioners. So there's a chair and a vice chair on the different boards. A number of months ago, a couple meetings ago, the vice chair vacated a seat because we have new commissioners that are appointed. So the chair has the authority to make a nomination during this meeting, and you can vote on that. Yeah.
Commissioner Hanlon seconds.
Okay, it's nominated and seconded. Commissioner Carell will be the vice chair. All in favor, raise your hand.
Motion approved.
Motion approved. Okay, thank you. The last thing I want to talk about is something that has been bothering me for a long time, and I brought it to the attention of several people, including one of the councilmen, and he was told that they were within their rights to do it, and it's going to trigger something else. 704 Grand is the San Ysidro Health Building. It is a wonderful mid-century brick building right across from where the hospital and those buildings were torn down, and they have the most obnoxious eyesore, eye pollution on the roof of that building. Their HVAC system, they have solar up there. It should never have been approved. And I was told that it was approved at the counter and they were within their rights. They have desecrated a historic building that will never go away. 100 years from now, people are going to look at that building and say, who in the heck approved this? I remember on the Planning Commission, a church wanted to do an addition, and we probably spent a half an hour about the fact that about a square foot of their air conditioning was visible from the street, to the point where they shrouded it so you couldn't see it. How this building got this approved, I'd like to know who approved it and what kind of action we can take against it. And where I'm going with this is, there are people at the counter that have authority, but they don't have authority to okay things on a historic structure, whether or not it's on the register. This building should be on the register. It could be on the Mills Act up until now, what they've done to it. When those buildings are built across the street, that whole Palomar complex are going to look out at the roof of that building. And I challenge you to drive by and take a look at it. I've sent pictures to everybody, but it's like, oh, it's done, we can't do anything about it. They should be forced to do something about it. The owner of that building that allowed them to even do that to the building, let alone whoever at the counter approved it, they should have said, that's a historic building. Maybe we ought to take it to the HPC, because of everything that we do and don't do, that's the one thing we should have had authority over. So I hate to put that all on you, but if you could make a note of that. Like I say, I have sent pictures to a couple of the council people, and they drove by and said the same thing that I'm saying, but then they said, well, everything appears to have been approved properly, but I think something fell through the cracks on that one.
Sounds like it. Chair Spann, thank you for bringing that to my attention. I'll work with, there's a new development services director named Andrew Firestein, and I will work with him to see if he can identify exactly what happened with that and how it got approved and what this address is and who the owner of that is. So
Have you ever driven by that?
I personally have not.
Oh, please do it, because before the next meeting, I want to get
Definitely.
your take on it.
Yeah, for sure.
Thank you so much.
Yeah, of course.
Any other comments?
Are we going to be filling I see on here that there's a vacant commissioner seat. Are we going to be filling that in the near future?
Yeah, so it's currently, there's an unscheduled vacancy. We had one of the commissioners had to resign, and then as a result of that, we're just currently recruiting. So if you know of anyone who would like to apply, they're able to do so just like all of you did previously. Go on the city's website, select they want to apply for the HPC, and the interviews will take place most likely in December or January, and then they'll be seated sometime, I think, by February.
Cool.
This has really been a great group. This is my 9th year on this board. And when I came in, I was kind of the youngster, and now I'm not anymore. But there's a lot of on-the-job training. There's a lot of time sitting up here learning from your fellow commissioners. Like, we're up here to have all different viewpoints and walks of life and coming in and trying to help the community really to understand that. Like, when I got on the board, I did it specifically because I felt that people trying to move into that neighborhood felt that there was a wall kind of between this table and that area, and that it didn't feel like friendly that you could do stuff to your house. And I was just like, it shouldn't be that way. And so I came on here to try to help that. And I spend a lot of time talking to people in that old Escondido neighborhood saying, it's really easy to do stuff. It's not hard to fill out an application. These guys work really hard to make it really easy. And it's a phenomenal neighborhood to live in. Like, I love the old Escondido neighborhood. That's why I'm here. So when you're up here, we're all going to work together, and we're all going to try to help these homeowners go in the right direction to do the right things to their house. And sometimes it's a little confrontational because somebody goes and builds a carport in their front yard, and we're all going, what? Like, what on earth did you just do? And we have to tell them, you have to tear it down and fix it. And they get upset, not at us, but they're upset because you just told them they had to tear down their stuff they spent money on. But it's because we want to keep the integrity of the neighborhood, but we also want to help them know that it's okay and it's a great area to live in. So we're all going to work together. Those of you that feel uncomfortable or like you're not quite sure what you're going to do, that'll come with time. And spend some time, researching about the Mills Act on your own and going around to the neighborhoods and looking at the houses, because this is like my favorite commission. I really enjoy being part of this, and I hope you guys will too.
Thank you. Yeah, I just keep hearing, and I'd love to discuss further in the future. I know with time we'll get more information. I think I am at least very eager to get involved. It's one of the reasons why I decided to apply for the commission. But yeah, I think for me, I'm just, as a new member, I'm just trying to understand, what do we do, what do we don't, what don't we do, what are we interested in doing, and I'd love to be able to have, just more discussion around that in the future.
You're here in a little bit of a transition period because the commission was kind of the same people for a long time, and then it's now like half new people, and it's going to be even more half new people. And so some of that may even be led by you. You may have an interest that you can bring to us, and we look at it and go, wow, we can do that in the community. Like he said, like I want to get involved in the community. I'm doing certain things, but I'm not doing something from a historic preservation commission standpoint. So maybe that's something you end up bringing to us and helping us go forward with. We've kind of done the same thing for a while, and that doesn't necessarily mean it's a good thing,
And if I may add to that, Commissioner Suarez-Vela, I think that one thing you can all do is if you want any items placed on the agenda for the next meeting, simply email myself. I'll coordinate with the next staff liaison to have that placed on there. And it could be something as simple as like establishing the vision for the HPC or something to that effect. So anything you want to have the commission work on, we can make sure that it's discussed at the next time you guys have a meeting.
And I would just add, as similar going through the Brown Act overview, I know that our past commissioners have done that. As Associate Planner Flores noted, Article 40 of our zoning code, which is all available online, is all about historic preservation in our community. And there is a actual whole section within that just talks about this committee, and talks about roles, and it talks about purpose and intent, some of the things that you were talking about. I would agree with Commissioner Carell that's it's definitely, in terms of your individual passions, will play a part in shaping how you view each of those things and what you hope to accomplish on this commission. But both new and old, it's always a good place to maybe go back, read through that section, because that's going to give you the best foundation I can tell you in terms of your role in the process and your role as a commissioner. And then from there, you'll be able to add on the layers of the training of the Secretary of Interior standards, the Mills Act requirements, just experience dealing with historic resource reports as they come through you, and you'll be able to read those and understand what makes a building special and historic. So, but fundamentally, as a recommendation to look at, I would start there.
Thank you. Does anybody else have any comments? Okay, I will, our next meeting is noted in here.
I believe it's November, if I'm not mistaken. November 17th, yes.
The other thing is, I think that when we turn in our survey to the state, we need to show continuing education. So if you come up with something, and they're usually at noon or right around there, so if you can work it into your schedule, we need to show continuing education. Otherwise, it makes us like we're not moving forward.
Yeah, and Commissioner Span, just to build on that, we've identified, again, now that we're fairly close to, or I should say much more staff than we were, we've begun the process of looking for training and have the actual ability to look for those types of things and those opportunities. And I know actually Planner Flores is going to be going to one such event, and through that one training, we do get access to the video library, as you said, and then we'll, again, some form or fashion, whether it's individually or perhaps just even at the next meeting, we'll be able to show that, and that will, for everyone's benefit.
I got a email from the people that put on the Planning Commissioner seminar up in Sacramento, and apparently they've expanded that to Planning Commissioner, Historic Preservation Commissioner. At least that's the thrust I got out of that. So I'd like to think that they're taking a more, they want planning, historic preservation commissioners, because we do perform something that works hand in hand a lot of times with the planning commission, not all the time, but every once in a while something will come up that we really do need to have a little bit of input on it. So it's nice to have that interaction. So anyway, thank you.
And if the commissioners find stuff or you see something about a training or those types of things, please do not hesitate to email, Associate Planner Ivan Flores. You can reach out to City Clerk Beck. He's going to get that stuff to us so we can coordinate, see what we can and can't do budgetary, and then also just to see if there's other alternatives through that. So don't hesitate, sending us if you get something or you're interested in, please send it to staff.
Thank you. So then we will call this meeting adjourned.